November 25th, 2025. Well, many things I didn't quite get to last week, as I mentioned, and I never did anything over the weekend. And so we'll get into those topics today because they're still kind of current as of now. The big one I think that came out, and it depends on your opinion, but was, of course, the Trump peace plan for Ukraine. This, 25, like 28-point plan, I think it is, something like that. At any rate, since that was issued, has now moved into some negotiations between Ukraine and the United States in Switzerland, uh, which is kind of interesting. We're trying to negotiate an end of a conflict with the country we're presumably supporting, and having trouble. But at any rate, that is essentially the issue, and and of course the question is, okay, where are the Russians on this? I mean, you'd think it'd be more likely to bring the two sides together and us try to referee the thing, but it's also unclear whether or not, to what degree, the Russians have accepted the Trump plan, and that now it's just a question of trying to get the Ukrainians on board and maybe the Europeans as well. It looks like that as of this recording, that there's a lot of pushback coming from Ukraine. And it's looking like they're moving not to accept the plan, and it looks more and more along the lines of the Europeans and them supporting that. Whereas supposedly now the Russians have sort of spoken and said that they're more inclined toward accepting Trump's plan, but not so much what the Europeans want. So that's kind of how it sets at the moment. Um, I think the plan itself originally was based on the ideas that were discussed in Alaska when Trump and Putin had the meeting. And then after that, it looked as if things had then broken down, and then there were a movement in the direction of a negotiation in Hungary, which was then canceled. And at some point in there, Trump apparently had declared that Ukraine could actually win the war and actually take Russian territory as well. That is, not the current occupied areas, but actually going into what's generally considered sovereign Russian territory. And apparently, this may have come from a briefing General Kellogg gave him, who's a clear, a former advisor to Pence, as we know, and so we're kind of in the Pence school of thought, which Pence remains a very Ukraine hawk. So that's kind of so it looks like he's now leaving the White House. So it appears that Trump has now come back to understand that Ukraine is actually losing the war, that the siege of Pokrovsk has moved to the fact that it looks like the Ukrainians are almost completely surrounded now, not just operationally surrounded due to firepower, but literally physically blocked in there. And so, um, uh, and there's several other places where the fortress cities that ring the front line are slowly but surely being conquered by the Russians. And once that happens, then Russia can presumably move much faster forward through the open fields toward the river, the Dnieper River. And so, therefore, I think Trump now has got motivated to try to end the war, to head off a real fiasco, perhaps. Meanwhile, other people still think it's a winnable thing or something. So, at any rate, that's kind of what's going on with the plan, I think, and we'll see whether or not the Ukrainians ultimately reject it or not. They have till Thanksgiving Day to make a decision, and it's unclear what degree the U.S. has moved off the original plan toward the European-Ukrainian viewpoint, and what degree they haven't. Um, so, anyway, that's sort of it on that subject, and we'll just have to stay tuned in and see how that evolves. Um, so, if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Or you can, of course, follow me on Rumble, where the address is in the description below. So that's kind of how the thing is managed at the moment. On the other topics, we of course had the meeting between Mamdani and Trump last week as well, which came across somewhat cordially, I guess. And we don't know exactly we know that's a meeting that was requested by the future mayor of New York, um, but we don't know beyond the idea of kind of acting like we're all going to be reasonable here, what that's going to turn to. Because after all, um, as I understand it, upon return to New York, Mamdani is now calling Trump a fascist again. So it probably won't be long before Trump calls Mamdani a communist, and we'll be back to the where we were, I guess. Uh, from my point of view, though, it kind of would, I don't know. To me, the idea of Mamdani actually, driving New York into a ditch would be kind of a good thing for the Republicans. It might even lead to a chance in the New York governor's race, and and it could have national implications because right now, of course, the Democrats seem to be riding high because they won 3 races in very likely Democrat areas after the Republicans won a national election. And of course, usually the independent voter tends to be reactionary to whatever's in now, voting against the aspects of that they don't like. And so I don't think a win in Virginia particularly is all that astounding, um, or New York. But so that's kind of the way the situation is on that front. It does lead to the Republicans now pushing this affordability issue that the Democrats have raised. Although my question is, when was New York ever an affordable place to live? I mean, it's a lot more expensive in a lot of places, which is obviously the people at the lower end jobs are kind of stressed there, I think, in a way where by lower end I mean lower paying, so than many other places. So, at any rate, we'll see how this all plays out. I think the thing that Trump needs to focus on is the fact that he has been able to create a situation where a lot of jobs that are being held by illegals are now going to be held by U.S. citizens, and his program is designed thereby to create a pattern in which people's pay will start being increased. On the downside seems to be that there is a bit of a glut of college educated people who aren't getting the kind of jobs they're used to getting. And that's kind of separate from all the rest of this affordability issue, really. This has to do, I think, with maybe some overhiring that occurred at one time, and also this new AI revolution, which is basically eliminating some jobs. And of course, that's something we're going to have to contend with, which is a little bit different than the issue of food prices and that sort of thing that's being touted. I think on that area, it looks like that there actually is some progress being made. And we have to remember that almost all the big increases that occurred were done due to Biden policies. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. But that's kind of the situation we've got on that. The other aspect is the fallout is from the whole Epstein files battle. Apparently, the name calling contest with Trump against MTG has led to her finally giving up in frustration and announcing her retirement from the House, which of course is another ill-timed thing for the Republicans, as we have a very narrow majority, and we have a special election coming up. I guess it's next week, I believe it is, in Tennessee, I believe in the Nashville area, that district there, and which is now, I think, what was held by a Democrat. So we'll have to see whether we can win that one. That's kind of a high priority for everybody to get out and vote there, because we need somebody to get in there to replace our departing MTG. Although it won't be the same district, we need to keep the numbers up. There is a risk being raised if these resignations and maybe a surprise death or something occurs, the Democrats could literally get control of the House before the election, and then they would immediately start trying to actually block all of Trump's policies and start committee hearings and impeachment hearings and all that kind of nonsense. So there's a real risk there, and that's why Trump ought to be careful how he handles people in the House. With kid gloves would be recommended, in my opinion, rather than trying to run people out. I mean, it would probably be better to have a primary in the 14th district of Georgia that might be a little bit brutal than to have her resign now. Um, and most of the votes I don't think are like this Epstein thing. For some reason, some people believe that somehow this is going to help the victims of the Epstein thing to have all these files put out. I don't know if it helps them or actually makes their life more difficult, but that's another thing that's kind of on the agenda and it occurs. So we have to keep things under control here. And meanwhile, there is a bit of a question about what we're going to do on the healthcare issue, considering how that led to a government shutdown that drug on way too long and probably will actually slow up the economy and give us a bad fourth quarter GDP number, supposedly. We'll see how that plays out. I think we did okay in the third quarter, but at any rate, that will be something to be concerned about, is can we get through this thing, because the current temporary, continuing resolution expires at the end of January. And if we don't get something to deal with the Democrats, then we'll have a problem. On the other hand, there's a lot of conservatives in the House that may not be willing to vote for it. Then we'll get into a situation where we'll have a potential leadership conflicts as the deficit hawks turn against anybody that wants to make any deal with the Democrats. And the Democrats are quite unreasonable. And so there we are. The saga continues. So at any rate, that's about it. That's kind of my wrap up of the things that we didn't hit in the last video, because I focused more on the Age of Disclosure movie and potential issues related to that. And we'll have to see where all that goes. I understand that I guess producer of that was on Rogan, and I haven't seen that show yet. And so we'll follow up on that. But this is it for now. So I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. All for now.